Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Money with Alpha. I have a lovely guest with me today. Welcome, Leanne Tran.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here.
Yes. Oh, I'm really excited to delve into the work that you do. So Leanne is a psychologist who works with parents to help them parent children with difficulties in learning and other different areas. I'll let Leanne go into a bit more detail of specifically what she covers. But
Hmm.
she's got almost 20 years experience in the space. As yeah, conversations that we've had, I can just tell you live it. And it's
Mm,
such work that you enjoy doing and sharing. And I think it's really important because, again, one of the things we were talking about before we hit record was like money, you're not taught how to parent. And in
yeah.
this day and age, and no two children are the same. Parents, I mean, I've only got one child, but when you have multiple children, I see same environment. So that nature nurture kind of concept, which I'd like to delve into a
Yeah.
bit as well, is so interesting. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, Leanne, and how you got into this and how you decided on what area you wanted to specialize in.
Mm. I started off wanting to be a teacher when I was in high school, and an interesting kind of late um, minute decision to change tack and did psychology instead. But I think I've kind of come around full circle that I see it as a way of teaching kids about themselves,
Yeah.
and parents about themselves, but also about their kids as well. And so that's the passion that I really have. I also love supervising junior psychologists as well. So to me, that seems like another form of teaching as well. So I've
Yeah.
ended up right where I thought I would be when I was 15, I guess.
But that just
Um,
goes to show there's different ways to get to a similar result and do it in a way you love.
yeah, that's right. And I do love it. I've always loved working with kids and being around kids. Not sure where that came from, but I think my husband is a pediatrician, so he kind of has it as well. So it's something that we do live really all day, every day, having kids of our own. Um, I so I've started out my career. I've always worked with kids developing differently. So whether that's neurodevelopmental differences like autism and ADHD, or physical disabilities or learning disabilities. And I think I'm really drawn to helping kids who just don't have the same experience as their peers do.
Yeah.
And I think as parent, like the thing is then for parents of those children, their parenting experience is different to the experience of other parents. And what what you might think of traditionally as working perhaps doesn't with this group of kids. So adjusting your parenting to do it differently can be really helpful.
Yes, and I was actually listening to your podcast last week, I think it was, and you were talking about how ADHD sort of shows up differently in girls and boys as well.
Mm,
And yeah, and I think back to my childhood and I don't think I had ADHD. It was probably more the ADD. I don't really know the differences in the specifics, but
mm,
I constantly got in trouble for daydreaming. I
right.
was
Yep.
looking out the window. I'm also auditory, so we
Okay.
didn't really understand the different learning styles back then. Everything was visual. If you weren't like looking at somebody in the eye, you weren't paying attention. Whereas if I'm looking you in the eye, I have to concentrate on that, and so
Yeah.
I don't hear anything else.
Yep.
So I would be up, my eyes would be off to the side, but I'm actually concentrating. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting how things have developed over time.
Yeah, things have, but then they also haven't as well, because still lots of times teachers, particularly will say that a child's not listening because they're not looking.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we know kids they do things in a range of different ways. We just
Yes.
have to look, I guess, it's hard for teachers to look at each child individually, but looking at a child and how they do things themselves can really help you understand how they learn, and what support they need as well.
Yes. So at what point in the journey do parents tend to come to you? Have they been the children been diagnosed, or are they trying to figure out if they need to be? How does that process work?
It's so varied, and the range of ages I see is incredibly varied as well. So
Yeah.
when we think about kids, we think about under 18, and I'll literally see kids who are maybe from 12 months or 18 months old right through to 17 and a half.
Okay.
And so kids often are coming when they're young,
Mm.
for assessments to understand their needs, or perhaps they have had assessments and then need some help with supporting their developmental differences, or often secondary to that, kids might develop anxiety or some mood challenges.
Mm.
And then I work with families on that as well. So, right through from assessments for diagnosis through to supporting their individual challenges and then any secondary issues that come up as well.
Yeah. And have you, over the span of your career, have you noticed any changes in how their sort of, well, symptoms is not the right word, but how they present? Have things changed, or is it basically just the same? We're just learning more about it, and we're becoming more aware.
I think it's a bit of both. I think we're definitely, as a society, learning a lot more about things like autism and ADHD, and so are more aware of it. And
Hmm.
a great example of that is that traditionally, people who had disabilities, like intellectual disabilities or autism, may have been taken from families and live somewhere else in a specialist setting. So
Yeah.
weren't necessarily seen as much in the community as people are now.
Yes.
So I think that's a lovely change.
Mm.
And so we're more aware, but I think also more accepting of differences as well, which is lovely.
Yeah.
One thing I think has changed maybe is the development of technology, and that's affected our abilities to pay attention and that kind of stuff. So I think
Yeah.
in some ways, it's just that we've become more aware of difference, but in some ways, society is changing and evolving, and it's making it harder for all kids to keep up with that.
Yes. Yeah. There's so much information that comes at us from all different directions. I mean,
Yeah,
I just look at,
constantly.
yes, and there's so many different ways that you can be communicated with. I'll get a WhatsApp message, a messenger message, a text message, an email, and there's another messaging program that I use. And then I get reminders from Trello and from Outlook and from the
Yeah,
reminder
that's
app on my
right.
phone. I'm there just going, holy moly. Sometimes it's just, I was playing a game with my daughter yesterday. We play a game called Posty, and I'd left my phone out in the living room, and I was in the bedroom. And she's like, you can ask for your phone, Mama. I was like, that's okay. I'm actually very happy to leave it in the living room and just
Yeah.
play with you and be in the moment, because the
Yep.
thing buzzes at me constantly.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and I have it on silent pretty much all the time, because being auditory, just hearing the sound of the ding, ding,
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh my gosh, yeah, it gets too much. So I can't
Yeah.
imagine children and how they would be dealing with that.
Yeah. And there's lots of research out there about how long it takes us then to regain our focus after we've been interrupted, which
Yes.
by some estimates is up to 20 minutes or so. And that's with a fully formed adult brain,
Yeah.
um, probably without any differences like ADHD. So when you then think about it from a child's point of view who's still developing their attention and they have challenges,
Yeah.
sometimes when I do school visits, sometimes I think it's a wonder you're learning anything. Yeah.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
classrooms are so busy as well. Classrooms like having a phone on with all the notifications turned up.
Well, my daughter did prep in sort of as a in a what do you I suppose you call a mainstream normal regular school, and it was just she didn't get anything from it. She spent an entire
Mm,
year at school and didn't really learn anything, because I think her focus, because she might have some sort of neurodiversity, I'm not sure, but she does have some difficulties focusing.
mm,
And it was too much. This overstimulation, everything had to be done exactly the same way as every other kid. And she's like, why do I have to draw the thing like that? I want to draw this. So
yep.
we ended up putting her in a different schooling environment, and
Mm,
the entire school only has 30 children. So it's
right.
and there's multi ages in the
Yeah.
classes too, and it's so much better for her.
Yep.
And I've found also, whenever she does activities outside of school, one-on-one
Yeah.
tuition is so much better for her than in a group environment,
Yeah.
because she just gets too easily distracted by what the other kids are doing.
Yes.
So
Yep.
it's I look at our schooling environment. I really don't think it is optimized for how a lot of us learn. especially
Yeah,
those that would have neurodiversity.
yeah. I think about that too, in especially even in terms from a teacher point of view,
Mm,
because I know how difficult it is doing my job, which is one-on-one with kids most of the time.
yeah.
Um, I don't think I would be able to function as a teacher with that much going on as well. The expectations would be far beyond what my capacity is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you look at, yeah, 25 kids in the class and or more,
Mm,
and then this kid's over here. And also because, and while it's good that they've integrated the children into the classroom again, because there used to be these special schools, and I think to a certain
mm,
extent they can still exist, but other kids in there and there's support teachers and things change and someone gets distracted by what the other one's doing. And they're like, oh, why do they get a special teacher? And there's all this conversation that goes on around it as well. And it does get sort of too much. It's like we're on this sort of wheel. It just keeps getting faster and faster.
yeah, and I think the inclusion is a really great thing, but we've tried to include kids, but not really change that structure of the
Yeah,
classroom,
that's right.
which is a bit unfair on teachers and kids.
Yes, it's not just a matter of putting them in a regular classroom and just giving them an extra resource. It's a
Mm,
different environment that, yeah. So
yep.
I'm yes, I have to admit I have firm thoughts around our education system, and how that could change. But that's a whole different conversation. Um,
Yeah.
since 2020, have you
Mm.
noticed anything change in terms of anxiety levels or how kids learn? Or because I notice you've sort of gone more telehealth sort of space, and how have things changed, if at all, really? Because we're a few years on now, so obviously in the midst of it, it was a lot more intense. But now, as
Yeah.
we've had a bit of time and space to reflect, what have you noticed, or has anything sort of changed since then?
Yeah, in the space I work in, I think two things happened pretty close together. And the first one was the creation of NDIS
Hmm.
and the support needs of people with disability being better recognised.
Yep.
It was a surprise to nobody working in the industry that it was an area that was what's the word, underestimated. The need in that area was underestimated by the government. But then I think with that, people having access to the support they need meant that we're seeing lots and lots more clients come through.
Yes.
And then also with COVID, there were some changes that were good for um, neurodivergent kids. Lots
Hmm.
of autistic kids or kids with ADHD really enjoyed homeschool and did a lot better.
Mm.
But there
Yes.
were lots who also then found it quite difficult going back to school, or ones that found COVID challenging. So there were more um, kids seeking help for mental health difficulties.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of combined in this really, really busy sector, and it's hard for parents to find providers a lot of the time.
Mm.
And that's what really led me to want to provide information online for parents to access so they don't have to wait, and in a way
Yes.
that's convenient for them. Because I think that's one good thing from COVID is that we realized the potential to connect online with each other
Yeah.
and really maximize that.
Yes, yeah, I know that it's yes, that more immediacy. Because when you're having a problem, especially, and I'll ask about how the parents deal with it in a moment, but it just feels suffocating, and you're like, I need the answer right now. And we're so used to being
Yeah.
able to, like, even last night at the dinner table, my husband and I were talking about something, and we were like, oh, I wonder what that is, or what that's made up of. And we're like, we'll just get the phone and we'll Google it, and we can
Yes.
get the answer straight away. I mean,
Yep.
especially if you're in a heightened state of emotional distress,
Yeah.
you want some help straight away, but you also want
Yeah.
good help too, because there's a lot of
Yep.
things that could send you off path. How do parents present when they come to you? What sort of state are they in, and how do you work with them?
I think usually the state, I guess it's different if depending on where they are in their journey about understanding their child's needs. But the parents I help online now are ones who, um, have been through that diagnosis process with their children.
Yeah.
And so they're generally coming presenting with the a child they know and love,
Mhm.
but this recognition that the parenting skills they have are just perhaps not quite right. Or
Yeah.
they might think that they just want to be sure that they're doing all they can to set their child up for success. And because their child is autistic or has ADHD, then they're not 100% sure about that. It's
Yes.
it's great that we can easily find information these days, but sometimes it can be overwhelming as well for parents if they Google how to support a kid with ADHD. You're just inundated, and there's so many differing perspectives as well.
Mm.
So what I do is the courses I offer focus on the information I'm usually sharing with with parents
Mhm.
at the beginning of all these psychology sessions.
Yes.
Usually when parents come, the first part of support is providing some education about the challenges their child has.
Yeah.
And that information's generally the same, no
Mm.
matter the client. And then based on that, then we work on individual needs and differences from there. So
Yeah.
this is a way to provide that for parents straight away without having to wait 3 or 6 months on a wait list.
Yes. Yeah, because it's interesting as soon as you become a parent, you become, I mean, immediately you just become a sort of a survival kit kind of thing. But then as your children grow, you have to become a psychologist, a diplomat, a cook, a chauffeur. Like there's all these
Yep.
different hats that we have to wear.
Yep.
And the psychology side is, from the way I've experienced it, very colored by our own experiences and
Yeah.
how our parents dealt with stuff as children, how we, what we were told. So I sometimes have to watch myself when I sort of say something to my daughter. I'm like, oh my God, that's what my mum used to just say to me. I'm like, oh, no, I didn't like it either. So why am I
Yep.
saying it to my kid? How do parents kind of, is there a guilt factor that you sense from them, or, what, I suppose, what's the underlying emotions that sort of come out for parents?
I think sometimes there is that feeling of guilt, but because I think it's just parent guilt is rife no matter what's going on. But a lot of it is, I relate to what you're saying about it being automatic. We do what our parents did unless we actively choose to do
Mm,
it differently and learn about a different way to do it. But
yeah.
and that's probably much like you would experience with your clients and money, I think, because
Hmm.
we have these messages that we've just been taught, and sometimes not even explicitly,
Yeah.
but we learn. There's a great quote I read about how, as parents, we often teach our kids things that we don't intend to teach. And it's probably true with money as well. You
Yes.
think about it, like my dad was an accountant, but I didn't get any knowledge about money. And so for me, the implicit message there was that that's the man's thing to do,
Yeah.
among other things. And so without actively seeking to do things differently, we just kind of follow that path.
Yes.
Um, so sometimes it's guilt about that because we have this, in terms of parenting, an ideal that we want to be. And then there's the person that we just reflectively, or what's the word, automatically are.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of um, mismatch between the two.
Yes. There's balance between self-reflection and analysis paralysis.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes too, it's that parents wish that they'd done more, or they want to do more, or sometimes even there's a bit of fear. They're just really worried that they might make a mistake or do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think lots of times information about that and reassurance about what kids need is enough to resolve some of that stuff for parents.
Yeah. So I often find the people who are concerned the most, even with money, the fact that they're concerned that they're not doing the right thing is
Yeah.
often means they're doing some of the right things. It just,
Yep.
like, I've had clients who literally have just needed one session to sit down and help validate everything they're doing. I'm like, you're actually on the
Yeah.
right track. I'm not sure what you need me for. Like, I
Yeah.
just really wanted someone to tell me I was doing the right thing because I had no real idea. I was like, oh my goodness, yes. Well, keep going.
Yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, so what I wanted to make that point, like, because you mentioned about how Well, I think in terms of that client you mentioned, that awareness is such a big first step. And often people who are aware are, well on their way on the journey. But
Mm,
also sometimes it's that you don't know if you're missing anything.
yes.
And so that client coming to you was just looking for another opinion about whether there's a big blind spot they have. And for parents, it's often the same. They might feel pretty confident that they're doing everything they need to do, but they're not 100% sure. So they're just looking for that reassurance that they're not
Yeah.
missing anything.
Yeah. And I think in a way we don't have that community or the I can't think of the word, but that, that group anymore where we had different generations to lean on,
Yes. Yep.
where we were in very much a communal environment where, we learned from our elders, not just our parents, but others. So we got different perspectives.
Yeah.
And then that circle kind of helped with the children and then allowed us, we weren't quite so busy either.
Yeah.
So we had that time and space. And that's not saying I want to go back to the age where women were in the kitchen and the husbands worked,
Mm.
because otherwise you end up with so many times I hear people who had, oh, their dad was an accountant, but they didn't actually teach them about money.
Yeah. There you go. It's not that special.
No, we don't. It's a little bit like we take, and also that's another thing too. If there's something that we're good at, we take it for granted and we don't necessarily think it's something to pass on. Whereas if we've
Yeah.
struggled with something and had to learn it, we realize that it's something we've got to teach.
Yeah.
And because we know we had to learn it, I learned more about economics by tutoring it at uni than I ever did when I studied
Mm.
it. So,
Right.
where I think it's an important thing to be aware of the stuff that, because I look at my daughter and I think, how would, like, my husband sometimes has these expectations of the things that she should be able to do. I was like, but how would she know that? How would she
Yeah.
know to do that? She's never been taught or told. There's just this unwritten expectation that we've picked up as grown-ups over
Yep.
decades. But how would an 8-year-old know that that's expected? We need
Yeah.
to give her that information and the context and the reasoning behind it, and not
Yep.
just to do what I say. It's
Yeah.
explaining. I remember when I've been teaching my daughter how to do cursive because she was really interested in it, and they don't teach it until like grade 3. And also when I was teaching her how to write, and because we did some homeschooling, so we do like the entries and the exits. And I was like,
Hmm.
this is why you need to write the letters like this. It's not because I want you to do what I say. It's because it will make your life easier later. So
Yeah.
that you start here, you end here. And as soon as she understood that, she was on board with it. It wasn't just
Yeah.
me imposing stuff. It was that explanation and involvement in the process. But
Yep.
still, I was on your websites going, okay, how do you teach cursive? How do you, I was like, and even with the teaching, I'm so glad she's in school again, because some of the stuff she comes back with, she's like, I'm like, there is a reason that there are trained teachers teaching our kids because
Yeah.
there's a
Right.
way to teach literacy.
Yes. Yep.
So it's that we can't do everything, and we do need professionals to help us. And in the parenting space, sometimes you just want someone to tell you you're actually doing okay.
Yeah. That's right.
Honest with your child that you're like, sometimes I'm not the best parent, and sometimes I yell and I don't like it. Like
Yep.
I had a little incident last week, and I said to my daughter, so look, I don't like when I have to raise my voice, but sometimes it's the only way I can get attention, especially this was in a park environment and I had
Yeah.
kids running in the opposite direction. And so I had to raise my voice to get heard. But I don't like it. So, and then of
Mm.
course I feel guilty about it as well. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yep.
So,
But, that's something I commonly hear too. But I think um, I would reassure you that that's a great part of modeling. So you're repairing the relationship by explaining you didn't want to do it and this is what happened. So you're repairing the relationship, so no damage done. But the other thing too is that you're modeling for your daughter how to admit that you made a mistake and talk about it. So, and those are two very healthy things. Yeah,
yeah.
we get caught up so much on the guilt of it.
Yes, yes, and it sort of lingers still, and it becomes then a memory. And it's like, okay, but remember it in a way to improve on it next time, rather than to beat yourself up about it and do it again, and then beat yourself
Yep.
up about it and do it again.
Yep.
But yes, it's an interesting journey being a parent. It's one that's been very eye-opening. Um,
Yeah.
how do you see it with, because you've got 3 children?
Yeah.
When you see that whole nature nurture, how does that kind of play out for you in your world, and also with the children and parents that you help?
I think uh, a lot of times kids are who they are more than we realize, I
Yeah.
think. And I think our job as parents is to put in place some boundaries within which our kids can be whoever they want to be or whoever they are.
Yeah.
Um, and that's different for kids within the one family and across the classroom as well.
Mm.
I think nature is probably, we want to make sure our kids don't experience any adverse things
Mm.
like neglect and trauma and all of that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
research shows that a parenting approach that you take doesn't really account for a lot of variation in how kids turn out in the end. So it's really just about, I think, knowing your child and supporting their strengths and interests. And
Yeah.
if you do that in alignment with your values as a family, you've got
Yes.
everything important covered.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It came up a number of years ago. My cousin didn't grow up with her dad. He left when she was 2 and he re-entered her life when she was 30.
Mm,
And it her getting to know him made things so much more clear for her because she was so much like him.
mm,
But she's like, I didn't grow up around him. So that brought up the whole nature nurture thing. And I was going, oh, okay,
yeah.
this makes so many things make sense.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, we all have characteristics of both our parents, partly from the nurture side as well, and there's probably some
Yeah.
genetics in there too.
Yep.
But yeah, I found that fascinating. I thought, oh my goodness, this is really an interesting concept. But
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, so
Yep.
yeah, no, I love that. Does money ever come up like with the kids? I mean, obviously, it's probably more the older children. Like I wouldn't expect you 12-month olds.
Yeah.
But does it ever appear? Do they have anxiety around money? Does it ever kind of come up in any of the work that you do between the parents and the children?
It doesn't a lot except for when we're talking about rewards and that kind of thing. So it's
Yeah.
not, I don't see a lot of anxiety about money or worries about it from children. I
Hmm.
do from parents in the fact that raising a child's expensive and
Yeah.
it's difficult to know um, it's difficult to be able to afford everything available to kids. So
Hmm.
always when I'm making recommendations for families, I try to say to just focus on, you know, the real, the things that are really important and you don't need to do a lot of the other stuff.
Yes.
And to think about using resources really carefully. And one example is that I'm always into things that are backed by evidence and have a good evidence base, because if not, I think, people might say, well, if it's doing no harm, that's okay. But there's a financial cost there that
Mm.
means then that parents don't have that money anymore then to do what might actually help their kids.
Yes.
So if that's always a discussion that's, well, not always, but that often comes up for parents to how they can afford what their child needs.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of with kids, yeah, the only thing is it often comes up as a reward. And I guess with ADHD, it's kids often don't have the same internal motivation. So they need external motivators and rewards. And so that often as kids move into teenage years, it often just becomes cold hard cash, really. Um, but kids too sometimes worry their parents can't afford that stuff. And so I remember assessing a child who was really, really against completing this assessment, but needed it for school. And so I said, look, what's it worth to you? Let's negotiate here.
Yeah.
And she named a price, I think it was $20 or something, that was saying, no, but I'm not going to do it if my mum has to pay because she can't afford it. And so we
Mm.
just negotiated it, and that I was happy to cover that so that it could get done. But
Yeah.
I thought that was a really sweet thing. But it shows too, sometimes kids are much more aware of those things than we realize.
Yes. Yes. No, I talk a lot about the languaging around value rather than cost.
Yeah,
Um, so it's not that we can't afford this, is that we would prefer to use our money for other things. And
yeah,
do we
that's
really
right.
need that? I use that a lot with my daughter, that need versus want. She likes
Yeah,
squishmallows. I was like, do you really need another squishmallow?
Yep.
You could save that money up to buy, there's this other toy she had her eye on. I was like, well, you can save up for the bigger thing rather
Yeah.
than just wasting it on the little things. It's that, yeah, but and that's a conscious effort on my part. And she hears me talking about money quite a lot, obviously. So
Mm.
it's a
Yep.
different environment. But when I grew up with no concept of money at all, except the fact that my parents spent it and
Yeah.
that there was sometimes not enough because they spent it. So I was like spending bad, saving good.
Right. Yeah.
And then I went
Exactly.
too far the other way.
Yeah.
And then when I had money to spend after I started earning money, after I'd stopped studying, I was like, oh, and then I spend it again. I was going, I'm turning into my parents. So
Yeah.
there's a bit of swings and roundabouts that go on our journey.
Yeah, there is, isn't there? And I think I remember that you and I were talking before another day about my son who goes the other way as well and
Yeah.
doesn't like to spend much. And so sometimes we see that as a great thing, but then he's unwilling to take risks with his money, which he probably should being young. So um, yeah, it's such an interesting way to think about how our kids view the world and how we teach them, the values or lessons we want to teach them. And I
Yeah.
think by experiencing it is a really great way because I think kids too, like sometimes we expect them to be smart with their money, but we can't really expect them to be wise until they've had a play with it and they've actually had a go and they learn from making decisions that maybe they regret or they wish they hadn't made
Yeah.
um yeah before. So I think giving them lots of ways to experience it and learn with it is really useful. You've got to spend it to learn how to spend it well.
Yes. Yes. Wow. My daughter recently was looking in her wallet and she's like, where did my Christmas money go? I was like,
Mm.
that's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I wonder. You can't think of it, then it probably went on things that weren't very important to you.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good lesson.
So yeah,
Mm.
so again, yes, it's more if anything, we learn more from the mistakes we make than the successes we have, which
Yeah.
is sort of a slightly unfortunate sort of part of human nature. But I think when we have the successes, we also need to acknowledge them and go, okay, well, and like for instance, we've been doing some markets recently and she's been making some money at them. And I was like,
Mm.
just recognize that this is something that you made, that someone saw value in and they bought, and now you have this money. That's amazing. And so
Yeah.
now she's like, well, I don't want to spend it now, Mama. I was like, yeah, that's another
Yeah.
lesson in itself. So
Yeah, that's such a good point because it's the emotion that goes along with those losses that sometimes cements the lesson. And so stopping to really feel the emotions of the positive outcomes and the wins we've had is really
that's it.
important.
Yeah, it's important on both sides, absolutely. The balance of life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how can people find out more about you and what you do?
I think my Instagram is a good place to go, which is Leanne Tran Psychology.
Hmm.
Or my website is leannetran.com.au, and that's where I have the courses that are available for parents to do. But I've also got a newsletter which is called The Village in my mind because it's to replace that lovely
That was the
village
word I
like
was
you
trying to
mentioned.
think of.
Yeah, okay. um, yeah, just designed to maybe just try to connect with parents and share some of that information. So yeah.
Lovely. I'll put all of those links in the show notes so people can, if you're driving, you don't have to remember it. Well, it'll be in
Yeah.
there.
Yep.
That's
Awesome.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I really enjoyed this, and it's important because like I said, we don't learn about money, and it's important to learn about it. We don't learn about parenting, and especially when we've got children who are perhaps a little bit different or work in a different way, and their brains work in a different way. Helping parents
Yeah.
understand that is really valuable. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
That's all right. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy your week, and I'll see you next week.